So we realized, I think the weekend before they came to measure for the countertops, that we really should put the stove in place so that they can measure against it to where the countertops would go. So it was time to move the stove into the kitchen and get it off the cart. Now, I had remembered that I'd gotten a great comment when I did the cart video for the stove from Jon Wilson. And he wrote, "As for taking the range off the cart, might I suggest a 2x6 or 8, about 8 feet long, slide it under the range so it extends about 2 feet out from the back. When you lift, the range will come up easily and you can then slide the cart out from under the unit. Then just lower it to the floor." Worked for me. And I had some aluminum channels that we'd pulled out of the pool structure when we built the shop that I thought might work. They'd be light and fairly strong and thin. So I slid the channels under the stove and then onto some cinder blocks that are sitting on the subfloor so they're not scratching anything. And then I could lift the stove up, and then we had Calvin pull the cart out, and then I could lower the end of the channels that I was standing at. And what was nice about the channels, I realized, was that because it's a channel, there was a place for my fingers at the end. So my fingers didn't get crushed between the channel and the floor. And then once that side was down, we could then carefully slide the stove down the channels. Then I could lift the other end and we could pull the cinder blocks out, and then slowly lower the channels down to the floor. And then once they were on the floor, they were basically not holding up the stove anymore, and the stove was free of the cart and the channels, and was just sitting on its own wheels and feet. So the wheels that are on the stove worked really well to push the stove in and out of its spot. They're not really meant for moving the stove across the house. I really did need the cart in the end. It let us store the stove in the living room while the kitchen got built, and it fit nice and snug. I wanted to make sure the stove would fit in the space I had for it before they came to measure for the countertops. Our counters are going to be a little bit on the high side. I think they're 37.5 inches. So that means the stove has to be up a little bit. The legs and the wheels on the stove are adjustable, and I may have been able to get it up that high with just what's on the stove, but I thought it might be a little better to have it up on blocking so that I didn't have to extend the legs and the wheels so much. So I made some 2x4s into blocking to go below the stove. And I planed a piece to the same thickness as the blocking, and I cut that in half at a diagonal to make 2 wedges. And I could use those wedges to get the stove up onto the blocking. Now, as I was putting the blocking in place, I want the front edge of it to line up with my base. My plan is to put a little piece of baseboard in front of the stove. That can be removed if the stove needs to come out. I wanted something to attach that piece of baseboard to, so the blocking for the stove can do that job as well. So you can see how the wedges then fit in front of that blocking, and I could push the stove up the ramp carefully. And there's a little anti-tip bolt on the back of the stove that needs a little clip that gets bolted to the floor. So this little clip needed to be up the same amount as the stove was up on the blocking. So I made a little piece of blocking for that clip. And then the plumber came and hooked up the gas line. And then the gas company came and turned on the gas. And we cleared out the line of air, and the gas came on. And it works. So then the countertop company, 3cm Stone, came out to measure for the countertops. They have sort of a nice device it's sort of a box with a string on it, and they can find points in the kitchen, and the computer in the box will then draw a plan of the countertop. which they then take back to their shop and they can cut the shapes for the countertop.
Come on in till you're over the bump.
So they showed up bright and early on a Monday morning. And they brought the countertop in, which went smoothly. It looked fairly heavy. It went into place, and it looked like it was about right. They kept worrying me as it seemed like it wasn't quite fitting right. In the end, it all worked out. Really what was important was that the seams all lined up and that we got the same overhang all the way around the front, which was 1 3/4 inches. So there was a lot of sort of fiddling and pushing a little bit and kind of nudging, and their process is to get it exactly in the location that it needs to be, and then they do the seams and then they glue it down.
I mean, this is pretty much 1 3/4 right here.
Okay.
So that's going to be the overhang. That should be fine, right?
Yeah. So one corner next to where the fridge is going to go, the wall stuck out a little bit, so they had to grind off that corner, which will be below the backsplash, so it can be a little rough. That got brought back in again and fit in place. So now that the countertops are in the right location, they can do the seams. And there's one long seam, which you can see sort of in the center of the frame here. So they'll mix up some epoxy and put that on the seam, and they'll get it as close as they can get it without any clamping. And they checked for flatness. It was nice and flat. Then they put the epoxy in the joint and squeeze the two pieces together. They have these nice vacuum clamps that pull the two pieces together, but that's actually not the real important job. When you have a long seam like this, the pieces of countertop material can actually be out of flat. And so what you can do with these is use these little cams that you can see. The little black things that are sticking up are cams that help push different sections of the countertop up and down so that you can get the seam perfectly flat for the whole length of the seam. And then that had to sit and run while that seam set up. So they did the joint behind the sink, which was much easier because it's a shorter joint. And they did the backsplash. We went around and around on what kind of backsplash to do, and we ended up doing something really simple. It was sort of complicated because each of the three sides of the kitchen wanted a different kind of backsplash. So we sort of went with the lowest common denominator, if you can put it that way, and just went with something really minimal. And the seams in the backsplash got the same epoxy. And you can see they're sort of moving it in and out to get it nice and flat. He was using a razor blade to check for the flatness. Then they could drill the holes for the sink. So we needed one hole for the faucet and then one hole for the button for the garbage disposal. We kept it simple. And then the holes are in place. And there's a little piece behind the stove that needs to go in. And that got the same epoxy and the same caulk to kind of hold it in place. It was fun watching these guys work, as it was clear that they all had a role and a set of jobs that they did, but they all knew what the others were doing so that they could start their task, or they knew when to start their task based on what was being done, which was kind of fun to watch. It was sort of like three different people doing a single job. It was like three minds doing one task. It was clear that they've done this a lot. And we can put the backsplash on the wall behind the stove. So this backsplash will be under the breakfast bar piece once that gets built. And they did the caulk between the backsplash and the wall, which really helps with the look, because you could really see how crooked the wall was with a straight backsplash up against it. But that sort of goes away when you fill that black space in with white. And then they clean that up with a razor blade again. They used razor blades for everything. You could pull the tape off. They actually ran a bead of caulk on the underside of the countertop on the inside of the cabinet. And that's sort of what's holding it in place. And they ran a bead of caulk in the corner and then scraped it off with a razor blade. And that seam basically disappears with that. And cleaning up the sink and cleaning everything up, and they were done. It was fun watching them because they were joking and teasing each other the whole time, but getting the job done. So it's really coming together. The stove's in, the sink's in, the countertop's in, the hood is actually in. And really the last thing is the fronts on the doors and the drawers, which I've been putting off, and I keep finding other things to work on. So that's what has to be next at this point. Thanks for watching.